As Sooner Nation turns, it's a ongoing soap opera, weekly, now daily updates needed, maybe hourly updates soon. Of course, this is our second edition of Oklahoma Sooners Live this week. We typically come your way as we are right now, Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time, but certainly check out our live stream from yesterday as we address the Dillon, Gabriel, and Caleb Williams situation at OU. This show is only possible because of Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football. So we appreciate Jason being here. And Jason, thank you once again for two shows this week. And who knows how many more I might try to drag you into if
Oh,
this
absolutely.
continues.
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to be here.
So just to clarify off the top, so not a whole lot has necessarily happened over the last 24 hours, but just to be clear on some talking points that we hit on before we started to record, Mario Williams has officially hit the transfer portal, so that was expected. Caleb Williams has not. So just kind of outline where we stand and what are the expectations of Caleb Williams in regards to where he has set his sights, even though he hasn't officially entered the transfer portal, and now Mario Williams has, and their connection.
It's very bizarre, Mark. To your point, Caleb Williams announced this on Twitter midday on Monday, so we're going on almost 72 hours now since he'd made his social media declaration that he was going to hit the portal, but he has not officially hit the portal. From To your point about Mario Williams, he made his intentions known yesterday, and then almost immediately thereafter hit the portal. So, yeah, I mean, I don't really know honestly, Mark, what to read into it. From some of the people that I've talked to, I get the feeling that if this decision was just Caleb Williams' decision alone, I don't think he would move. I don't think he would go forward. I think he's got some people maybe in his ear talking to him that they feel like that he could be put in a better position elsewhere other than Oklahoma. I'm not sure what's leading him to that leading them to that belief, but I think that's from some of the things that I've been hearing, that's the case. So from Mario Williams' perspective, he made no bones about it. He mentioned he's been very vocal about this over the last couple of days that he wants Caleb Williams to be his quarterback wherever that goes. So I think a lot of people it's led a lot of people to think that Miami could be the landing place for both of these kids, specifically if Joe Brady is brought on as the offensive coordinator at Miami under Mario Cristobal staff. I know that there hasn't been I believe at least over the last couple of hours, I don't think there's been a offensive coordinator named at Miami. So if that's the case, I think Miami probably has a leg up on both getting both of those kids. But I still stand firm with what we talked about yesterday, Mark. I would probably say 80-20 from my perspective that Caleb Williams is probably gone. There's probably a door in which the door's still open, right? But there's a path where he could return to Oklahoma. But I still think he's probably still he's still gone wherever that might be. Not sure.
So yesterday we talked about the connections that have been made. Some of them were just kind of assumed. Lincoln Riley, of course, recruited and signed him. He's an offensive guru, developer of quarterbacks. So that was more or less assumed, and it makes total sense. Other connections were made because of some more recent news. Georgia, you mentioned Miami, again, USC, and a few other spots, but those being some of the main ones. But Texas A&M also thrown into the mix. So also with Mario Williams, 35 catches this past season, 380 yards, about 11 yards per catch, 4 touchdowns. And you had mentioned to me that he had stated that he wasn't necessarily happy with the way he was used. Do you see that more or less as just a frequency issue? I need more targets, or in the way he's used on the field in regards to slot versus wide out, or what they're doing with him?
Yeah, I think it's more targets, Mark. I think that's more of the issue that he's had, and I think some of the fans have really had some of the same things. And I think, you know, one of the things that's kind of rang true for Oklahoma. You saw how good a season Charleston Rambo had at Miami, right? Didn't necessarily have the best year as a team, but him individually had a really good season, over 1,000 yards receiving, I believe, this year, and really put himself in a position to go to the NFL. And I think Oklahoma has seen some kids move on from Oklahoma and then have maybe a better season, a better career than they had at Oklahoma, whether it's underutilization or whatever it might be. Just maybe a different, you know, perspective and a different place helps that out a little bit. So yeah, I think it was more of the underutilization in terms of targets, more so than anything else.
Charleston Rambo set the all-time Miami single season receiving mark. I believe that's in yardage. 1172 sat out they didn't play the bowl game, but he was planning on opting out of the bowl game against Washington State. 79 catches, almost 1,200 yards, 7 touchdowns for Rambo at Miami. And of course, they had a situation where De'Ara King was initially the starter, got hurt. They were a bit in flux for about a game or so, but Tyler Van Dyke stepped in and turned out to be a find for them, as he turned out to have a tremendous season in final 8 or 9 games. So they seem to be set with their quarterback of the future. Although if Caleb Williams shows up, they could have quite the battle on their hands, because Tyler Van Dyke, really, he was throwing for like 350 a week, 3 and 4 touchdowns every week. Looking at Mario Williams' usage, his best game by far came against Texas Tech, 5 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown, but he was getting his 3 to 4 catches per week. Again, 35 catches overall, and finished up in the bowl game against Oregon with 2 catches for 33 yards, only less than 11 yards per catch for Mario Williams. So we will be taking, of course, your comments and questions here for the next 45 minutes or so right here at the Voice of College Football, Sooners. And we will continue to run down where we stand on everything else. So Mike Woods has officially entered the NFL draft. I got to think that was expected.
You know, I think initially it was, Mark. I'd heard some noise that, you know, he may be interested in coming back for an additional COVID year, but you know, I think he just decided, you know, he didn't have necessarily. I don't think he had as good of a year production wise as a lot of Oklahoma people, including myself, thought that he would have. Not necessarily that he played terribly. That necessarily wasn't the case, but but I think one of the things that you think about from some of these kids, Mark, is specifically these extra COVID year at a position, whether it be like a quarterback or a running back or a wide receiver, that's extra wear and tear on these legs and these bodies for another year playing. Playing at the collegiate level, when obviously I think most of these kids at the end of the day, their goal is to play in the NFL. So I don't necessarily blame him, even if the kids that don't necessarily have a great year, they can certainly do wonders for themselves in the combine and things like that. So yeah, not completely surprising. I thought there was a chance that, you know, he might come back. He might come back for an extra year, but so I think one of the probably the biggest concern right now with everything happening with Caleb Williams and then Mario Williams and then obviously Mike Woods, Jaden Hazelwood has left the program as well to Arkansas. Is what does the wide receiver room look like? There's, you know, does Oklahoma lose any additional wide receivers because of Caleb Williams, depending on where he ends up? I think there's some thoughts that, you know, when you look at Jalil Farouk. Farouk was a high school teammate, really, really close friend of Caleb Williams. So he's a guy that I think initially a lot of people just assumed would probably go. There's some thoughts starts to talk about Marvin Mims as well. Talk about Theo Weiss. Theo Weiss actually portaled or had considered portaling and then kind of came back. So I think over the next week or so, it'll be really interesting to see what Oklahoma's wide receiver group looks like, because a lot of these kids, they can take their time and make their decisions. However, I think a lot of them would like to be in place when spring practice starts, or maybe not necessarily when school starts, but at least closely thereafter. So, I think some of these things move fairly quickly, so it'll be interesting what's happening. I think if we don't see any sort of announcement like Caleb's coming back between, I would say, midweek next week, I think the safe assumption that he's probably moved on either publicly or privately and not made it official yet. Um, but I think that'll be interesting. But what I've been hearing from some people that I trust is that those three receivers seem to be pretty firm on staying at Oklahoma right now, which I think is a really good thing for Oklahoma, specifically when you talk about Mims and Farouk. Farouk is a guy that played really well in the bowl game for Oklahoma against Oregon. So having those guys back, plus whoever they end up bringing, through the portal, maybe even through the late signing period, will be big for the just to solidify that wide receiver position.
One note on the Miami coaching staff is that they have hired a co-offensive coordinator, Brian McClendon. So that's Mario Cristobal bringing one of his staff in from Oregon. And that's been talked about and expected for quite a long time, ever since Cristobal got the job at Miami. I want to remind everyone, if you're interested in Miami football and maybe even just for these connections with the Oklahoma situation, possibly in Caleb Williams, we do have a Miami channel here, the Voice of College Football, and we've got a couple Miami live streams each week as well. So Mike Woods, like Mario Williams, caught 35 passes last year, 400 yards. So National Signing Day, the first round passes by on December 15th. Most teams have secured their classes, or about 90%, but Oklahoma, with the transition of coaching staffs, probably on the lower end of that. So still some work to do looking toward February. Jason, I don't know if there was anyone in particular that you wanted to run down, or just the overall topic of where this seems to be headed for the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, so I think from an overall perspective, Mark, I think Oklahoma expects to, it's a lot. I mean, I think it's a lot when you take in the transfers that Oklahoma has had in the early departures to the NFL. Oklahoma's probably in the neighborhood where they've lost around 50, will lose 15 to 20 at least kids off of this 2021 team. So right now Oklahoma has 17 guys in the early period that they've signed, and then so have heard that Oklahoma could take between the early and the late period, plus transfers in the neighborhood of 35 to maybe even up to 38 kids that will be new additions to the roster in 2022. I think Gentry Williams is a guy, first and foremost, is who Oklahoma is. I mean, obviously targeting, but still needed to help kind of solidify that commitment from Oklahoma. He's never decommitted. He's just mentioned that he wasn't going to sign early and was going to wait to see who Oklahoma finished off the staff with on the defensive side of the ball before he made a decision. I haven't seen anything that leads me or heard anything that leads me to believe that he possibly would be going elsewhere. I think initially it was between Oklahoma and USC. Haven't really heard anything from the USC camp related to him. Maybe even wavering. So still a big get for Oklahoma. I think one of the things we've talked about this at length in terms of recruiting the state of Oklahoma through the year, and I think that's one thing that's going to be a big priority for for Brent Venables is to be able to recruit that's the state of Oklahoma, keep some of these kids in house that they necessarily haven't been able to in the past. So there's a lot of different names that are that Oklahoma's in on. There's probably about 5 or 6, I think, right now publicly that Oklahoma. Our Mason Thomas is a kid that has been previously committed to Iowa State that Oklahoma got in on, and we're seeing a little bit of movement. Looks like he might be very much in the in the thralls of looking to kind of make that flip. And so, like I said, there's a couple of other ones. There's an offensive lineman, 5-star offensive lineman out of Texas that's really kind of between Oklahoma and Texas right now. Is going to commit within the next few weeks. It's looked to have been a Texas lean for quite some time. The fact that Texas has really kind of cleaned up on the offensive lineman side of things makes it maybe a little bit of a possibility that Oklahoma could kind of get in there and and maybe change his mind or change the perception of where he's at. But yeah, there's going to be between now, Mark, and then the beginning of spring practice here for Oklahoma, there's going to be a lot of movement, a lot of additions, probably taking more kids and bringing more kids into the program in year one than they've done in quite some time. And so, when you look at it from a staff perspective, going back to where Gentry Williams was looking at the staff, I think you can make an argument, a solid argument, that Oklahoma has considerably upgraded on the defensive side of the ball from a coaching perspective versus where they've been in the past. They've got multiple guys that have won national championships. They've got multiple guys that have coached in the NFL. They've got multiple guys, that have, they know what they need to do to be able to not only win the national championship but compete in the SEC. So when you think about Jay Valai coming over, obviously has that experience. May potentially win a national championship right now this year with Alabama. And then some of the others, I saw a stat where the combined staff that Brent Venables has been able to bring over, from various places that he's been able to bring over, have 8 national championships combined, winning on the defensive side of the ball. And I think those are some things that Oklahoma necessarily hasn't had in the past. So I think that's, you're seeing that in the recruiting side, more so probably from the 2023 cycle, Mark, but because 2022 is it's obviously really, really late in the cycle, but you're seeing just by social media interactions, you're seeing a lot of these kids that are, kind of already getting visits, that were not on Oklahoma's radar. And now with Todd Bates coming over, now with all the staff that they've been able to bring on, and Jay Valai is not official, but it's probably going to happen. So I think that's going to help. Obviously, it's going to help Oklahoma bring in a much different athlete than they've had in the past.
Got Jason Ray here from Last Word on College Football, so please check out his work and the rest of the fine folks there at Last Word on College Football. And Jason and I, of course, have brought you Oklahoma Sooners live now 39 consecutive weeks, typically on Wednesday right at this time at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. And if there is breaking news, we do our best to get together and provide that analysis for you as well. As I have stated to a number of people at certain times when they have said something in the lines of breaking news here at the Voice of College Football, that's really not my take on all of this, and that's not our approach. We are not in the business of breaking the news ourselves, because first and foremost, that's beyond one person's ability to do. So there are news organizations out there that have droves and droves of people that have the connections and so forth to break the news. Secondly, it's kind of a waste of time, considering that once the news is broken, everybody knows it within about 14 seconds. So our job here is to analyze and have the discussion with all of you. So we do our analysis and want to hear from you as well. So we had a comment coming in earlier that Phil Lodehold, who of course is a well-known offensive tackle, played in the NFL as well, and a Sooner star from about 10 years ago or so, in that range, might be added to the staff. Have you heard anything there?
Yeah, I neglected to mention that up front when we were talking about the coaches, but yeah, he has been officially added to the staff as a support off the field staff member. Was with Jeff Levy. I don't know, over the last couple of years with Ole Miss, at least last year. I know he was with him last year. So that I think that brings a good, obviously, with his previous. Uh, with his previous experience at Oklahoma, and to your point, one of the better offensive linemen that Oklahoma has had here over the last 10 years, and then certainly at the NFL level, I think it brings an added, and I think it's something that you're seeing a very consistent theme from Brent Venables. I would assume that any guy that gets brought on is either going to be either a former player that's got into the coaching field that actually has familiarity with the program, has familiarity with Brent Venables, or really someone that they feel like is good enough to be able to help usher them into the SEC as well. So I think no, that's an absolutely great addition for Oklahoma from an off-field perspective. I think if more than anything, we've talked about this a little bit. Oklahoma over the last couple of years hasn't necessarily lived up to the expectations that they've had on the offensive line. I think one of the things that I'm very interested in is seeing how big of a transformation is Jerry Schmidt able to make with some of these kids in just one season? What does this athlete look like at Oklahoma, whether it's an offensive lineman, a defensive lineman, and things like that? When you look at Oklahoma's philosophy, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, it was slimmer, quicker, faster, and just the Speed D moniker. And I think um, Brent Venables is basically taking a 180 to that. He wants, obviously you want to get a lot of speed on the field, whether it's on the offense or defensive side of the ball. But I think he sees the need for some additional bulk up the middle, where Oklahoma was really gashed at times throughout the year, even by a lot lesser talented teams, just being able to run the ball. I mean, sometimes at will up the middle. So I think it'll be interesting to see what that change and how that manifestation from over to Schmidt looks like for Oklahoma this year.
As soon as I saw that name, Phil Lodehold, pop up, I thought, man, I haven't heard that name in forever. Mm-hmm. Wasn't he with the Sooners, about 10 plus years ago, something in that range? So, yes, I've looked him up here, and my memory's coming back to me. So, of course, he, as Jason mentioned, one of the best offensive linemen, pretty much the history of the program, second round pick to the Minnesota Vikings in 2009. So he, of course, appeared in the 2008 Sam Bradford and crew national championship game, and played 89 games, 7 full seasons in the NFL. And of course was a all Big 12 selection, etc. during his time at Oklahoma, probably garnered some All-America consideration as well. DeMarco Murray, of course, on that team.
Right.
All right. Interesting comment here coming in concerning the development of talent by Ryan, who says Oklahoma has not had a player reach their potential since CeeDee Lamb, which obviously that wasn't that long ago, but you would like a consistent production of guys who entered the program at a certain level, at a high level, of course, at a place like OU, but you further develop their skills and prepare them for the NFL.
Yeah, I think so. Partially agree with that. I think the lack of development I've seen more so than anything has been on the defensive side of the ball. I think coming into this season, Oklahoma had 4 or 5 guys that I thought had the potential to be really game changers on the defensive side of the ball. Nick Benito, Perion Winfrey, Isaiah Thomas were 3 of them, and then and then you can make a case for a couple. And Isaiah Thomas that had an opportunity, Mark, to be really game changers for this defense. And I think when you look at Perion Winfrey, I think he has the tools, but I think a lot of this for me comes down to the strength side of it. He got bullied a lot of times. A lot of times he would run around blockers as opposed to trying to, kind of run through them as you would see a typical nose tackle, defensive tackle try to do, a really solid one. But so I think his development wasn't quite as good. Nick Benito was another guy who could still one of the best edge rushers in the country, but I think still could have been much, much better than really what he was, because he had a tendency to take plays off. He had a tendency to take series off. So I think some of those guys on the defensive side of the ball, to me, have been more so, at least glaringly at the top of it, just in terms of not being able to reach their potential. Offensively, I don't really see that happening as much. I mean, I think maybe a little bit on the offensive line side of it. Marquise Hayes is a guy that I thought could have been a little bit better in terms of from a development perspective. But I think skill position perspective, I think Oklahoma has had a lot of guys that have really done well. Marquise Brown is an NFL wide receiver along with CeeDee Lamb that was mentioned here. Obviously, the quarterback position kind of goes without saying, right? And then Kennedy Brooks I saw that was a comment that was made. I mean, he's been a kid that's has developed his game as well. So yeah, I think there's a little bit to that, but I would kind of lean more to seeing that more on the defensive side of the ball than offensively.
A lot of these guys, in thinking of Hollywood Brown's ascent to the NFL, get labeled as burners, obviously at the high school, then the collegiate level. But it's one thing then to take that tag onto the NFL. And from all indications, everything I've seen of the Baltimore Ravens, which I'm not watching every game or anything, but I watch quite a bit of the NFL, is that, he's just as scary to defensive coordinators at the NFL level than he was in college. Like, he's got such top end speed and beyond that, just ability to hit the home run that, he's a pretty unique commodity.
Oh no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think when we talk about the quarterback position, I think one thing that's interesting, and some of the things that I'm just hearing just as we're talking through, which is very bizarre, is that Oklahoma might be in the market to take another quarterback. Heard some, by some of the guys that I talked to, that DJ Uiagalelei may be portaling at some point. That Oklahoma could be a destination for him. Casey Thompson is a guy that, I mean, it would be very poetic, I guess, interesting, ironic, whatever the word you want to use, for him to come to Oklahoma after him being at Texas and things like that. So I think Oklahoma's doing, and I'd heard a little bit of this just today. So I think I didn't really think, Clemson didn't have a great year, but they played much better down the stretch. That didn't necessarily play great in the bowl game offensively, but I think DJ's a guy he's a really interesting kid, because he in his games last year, he played very, very well, in Trevor Lawrence's absence, and then wasn't necessarily quite as good this year. But obviously that offensive line, plays into that and makes a big difference, right? So so those are the things that are just interesting to see how they play out. The portal is just it's just crazy. Like, it's crazy the number of kids that go. I mean, I don't know that there's anybody that would go into the portal that, outside of maybe like a Bryce Young or somebody like that I would be even surprised at this point.
Yeah, so a few things to hit on there. One would be just with the carousel of quarterbacks shifting places, the strategy that some guys have in selecting a spot is a bit intriguing because they're trying to go to a high level program, but to try to find one of those that doesn't have legit competition at the position is going to be difficult to come by. Um, so, yeah, there's going to be competition everywhere on one hand. In regards to, you were talking about, oh, shoot, who did you bring up at the quarterback position? Who were we just, oh, DJ Uiagalelei at
Yeah.
Clemson. Yeah, it's somewhat interesting that, and of course, the quarterback takes way too much blame, too much credit, and a lot of his issues were, as we talk Clemson football on our Clemson channel once a week. We've got, they had a wide receiver core for years and years and years that was arguably the best in college football that has really been downgraded the last couple of years. Ton of dropped passes. The offensive line, as you just mentioned, not up to the standards that they need to get to and win playoff games. But he had performed so well in difficult circumstances, considering, boom, he gets thrown into the Boston College game after Trevor Lawrence tests positive, and he's only got a couple days to prepare as the starter, and they get down by 3 scores. He leads them back to a win. Then he goes to Notre Dame, and even though they lost the game, he puts up 40 points. He puts up over 400 yards, puts up the highest single game passing mark ever against the Notre Dame defense. So a lot of us, and I'll admit to falling into the trap, just assumed this guy's the next Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, maybe not quite to that degree, but he's just going to take over and they just keep going because he's already shown it in 2 or 3 games. And boy, they hit a wall and they really struggled on offense. And it was him, but it was all facets of that offense. So I don't really know what he's capable of. I know he's got a strong enough arm, and he certainly got a strong enough build. He's a tank as a quarterback that is a menace in the open field to bring down. So he would be
Yeah,
a
no, absolutely. I think,
project to a certain
yeah,
extent.
yeah, without a doubt. And I think there's, I think it's very, I think it's very intriguing for if Oklahoma. I mean, if you're if you're DJ or if you're Casey Thompson, do you go into a situation knowing that you're seriously going to have to battle, for that starting spot, knowing that, because I think I had read this the other day. I didn't really know. I think Gabriel has a couple years of eligibility remaining. I think the thought was, he's just a rental for a year, but I think he has at least 2 years of eligibility remaining, maybe even 3. So for Oklahoma, so yeah, that'll be a interesting. And I'm like you, Mark, coming into this year, I probably had more questions about CJ Stroud starting at Ohio State, more questions about Bryce Young starting at Alabama than I did DJ. So yeah, I mean I think it's interesting. I don't know that any of us thought that Bryce Young would be good enough to win the Heisman. Obviously knew he was a great player, but the first year in a system, maybe you're the guy that. But no, I mean I coming in fresh, I expected him to have a really good year, but I didn't know about Heisman.
The only thing that I stated repeatedly in the off season that kind of gave me confidence in that direction was, well, first of all, when does Alabama make a bad move? It just seems like everything that Nick Saban touches turns to gold. Number one. Number two, just that I know in previous years concerning a lot of successful Alabama quarterbacks, even going back to Greg McElroy and AJ McCarron, and certainly Jake Coker and others who eventually won national championships, Nick Saban didn't pull the trigger on a decision until August camp. He allowed that quarterback competition to ensue. And for Mac Jones to leave for the NFL and Nick Saban, even before they get to spring practice, basically to say, this is the guy, this is our starting quarterback, I was like, wow, okay. if he's that sold on Bryce Young, and he is a 5-star, and it's not like I had scouted the guy. He hadn't played anything but garbage time against a couple opponents and thrown a handful of passes. But so because of those reasons, and just again the Alabama component being just different than everyone else right now, I wasn't surprised. So
the law of averages has to at some point before he retires, he's got to make a mistake at some point, right? Like, I mean, maybe he did that, and you'll remember the name. I can't remember the kid that started the Jalen Hurts came in for him halfway through the game and then moved to South Florida. I can't remember the kid's
yes,
name off the top of my head, but that's the only one that I can think of where he's really just
yeah.
not necessarily made a bad decision, but the kid just wasn't as good, wasn't Alabama level as a starting quarterback.
Oh my goodness, I've said his name a million times, but I can't remember it right now.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. I've got nothing against Nick Saban, but it would just kind of be nice to see him turn in like an 8-4 just one time.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and really, the question that you had just on the screen here is, I really don't, I don't have a good answer to the question, I guess, because. And this is the question that has been really kind of posed to me, Mark, on many different occasions, not necessarily just you and me, but just talking. Like, where does Caleb Williams feel like going is going to help him, number one, and why does he feel like being at Oklahoma is going to maybe not necessarily allow him to do that? And honestly, Mark, the only thing that I can think of is offensive line. You made this point very, very, very well yesterday that maybe he doesn't feel that the offensive line is in a position that's good enough to carry him to where he wants to be, which is not necessarily a Heisman Trophy guy, but just to be a first round draft pick or a number one draft pick, whatever you want to say. And so obviously money has nothing to do with the fact of how it's going to improve his draft stock, right? So, I mean, you have to be blind to think. I don't know how much money is and I say money, just an NIL situation is a catalyst to this whole thing. I mean, I've got to think it's part of it, but him and his father have come out repeatedly and have said that NIL is playing no bearing whatsoever in this. So I mean, I guess we'll see, right, when it happens. But yeah, the only thing that I can think of is he wants to go to a team that is solidified on the offensive line. Now, who is that, right? I mean, there's been discussion about Texas A&M. There's been discussion about Auburn as of late, North Carolina, UCLA. So I think the Georgia thing was early on, but I don't think that's real. I mean, for both sides, it doesn't really. I don't think it makes sense for either side. But yeah, that's the only thing that I can think of, Mark, at this point. It has to be offensive line. I'm trying to think of anything in Levy's system that would, really not play to his strength as it is primarily RPO. So he would get a chance to run the football a lot, which is obviously very explosive. Running the football, but yeah, I just keep coming back to the offensive line being maybe the tipping point on what his decision is.
Yeah, if I was Caleb Williams or anybody else that was a quarterback with first round potential and I was looking for a landing spot to prepare me for the NFL in the best possible way, yes, 3 things generally would come into consideration. One would be, what style of offense does this particular school run, which at this point, I don't think that there are too many top level, we're talking top 30 teams in the country that would run an offense that would be adverse to preparing for the NFL So I wouldn't think that that would be much of a consideration, but you could really take a deep dive into offensive approach and really what fits you. And then number two would be the quarterback coach and the head coach, and do they develop quarterbacks? Do they have a history of that? And then number three, what we just hit on at length yesterday and then also today, just the complementary personnel. Are the weapons going to make me look good? Is the offensive line? Two things with the offensive line. Number one, keeping me healthy. Number two, allowing me, because they're keeping me upright, to make the plays.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sort of Mark. I think even now I'm a little bit naive. I think still. I mean, I'm embracing it, but I'm a little bit naive to the fact that money might play a bigger role in this than maybe I've mentioned.
Yeah.
I've heard, and I don't know if this is reputable. I saw this. Maybe you saw this as well. That the Texas A&M boosters spent somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to $40 million on NIL deals for this 2022 recruiting class. So, um, I mean, maybe that's what college football is about now from a recruiting. Whoever has their boosters, whoever has the deepest pockets, are who's going to get the best players. I mean, I hate to think that, and there's still some kids, I think there's still some kids that are going to go to schools that really give them the best opportunity to go to the next level and to win a national championship and all those things. But it does seem like there's a lot of kids, and at that age you get thrown that amount of money, whether it's whether we talk pay for play, NIL, whatever it is. It's very, very difficult to pass up, knowing that, hey, maybe this isn't the place that I necessarily thought about going or dreamed of going, but hey, they can, as good as anybody, they can get me to the next level. Plus, they're setting me up financially. So maybe it's a money grab. I think that's what someone said in one of the comments, that as good of I think the perception was that after Riley left, that Oklahoma, the sky was falling, but they still were an 11-win team and still have tons of talent on that team. So if he's going somewhere, if it's not offensive line, then maybe that's what it is.
So I had a conversation with our guy Andrew Hattersley with Gig'em 247 Sports, Texas A&M, just the other day, and he was pretty upfront about, yes, the boosters raising money to support the recruiting efforts. So this is where I have an issue. So it's one thing to allow NIL in regards to just being an American citizen and having that right to earn money based on your name, image, and likeness. Okay. So I see that as Joe Blow's car dealership or lemonade or whatever it is, or so forth, wanting, an influencer, to use the modern term, to promote their product. And and then whether that's also signing jerseys and memorabilia and that sort of thing, that these athletes have that right as Americans to profit from that. But just flat out raising money. So basically they are, even though it's not going to try to correlate it to digging a ditch, it is technically work, what I just described. They are endorsing, they are a front man for, there's something there. There's an exchange of value, goods or services for the NIL money. This just kind of reeks of just a handout with nothing else involved. So that's kind of where I have an issue. So we also, let's see, have some comments. I think you left us there for a second, Jason. So I don't know if you caught where we were.
I got most of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Russ here believes that Caleb Williams is just flat out overrated. Just doesn't have inaccurate in particular. Do you even think that he would beat out Dillon Gabriel?
So here's my thought on the comparison between Caleb Williams and Gabriel, and I think where Russ kind of gets the lack of accuracy is, he struggled in a couple of games leading up to that Bedlam game. He struggled. He was below 50% completion percentage against Baylor, as well. So I think. I would not necessarily agree with that. I don't think that he's overrated at all. I do think that Caleb Williams um, is the better player overall. Obviously, he's much more explosive in the running game, without a doubt. Much more explosive in the running game. I think the jury's out in terms of which one of them's a better passer. I would lean right now in their career, right now where they're at. I would lean towards Dillon Gabriel being a little bit more of a polished passer from an accuracy perspective. But I think what Oklahoma is going to see this next year, assuming that Dillon Gabriel is the guy, you can make an argument, Mark, and I don't know. I mean, you can tell me if you've watched both of these kids a lot. You can tell me if you feel like I'm crazy. I think I could make an argument that Dillon Gabriel could be a better fit for Oklahoma next year. Not a better player in any sense of the word, but could be a better fit. Knows Jeff Levy's offense extremely well, has played in it for multiple years, is a guy who's not. He doesn't have the speed of Caleb Williams without a doubt, but he is a threat in the run game. So I think when you look at him, I think he's probably somewhere in between a Spencer Rattler and a Caleb Williams. Obviously, not as slow and as much of kind of a statue as Spencer was back there, but certainly doesn't have the elusiveness and the speed and the in the running ability that Caleb does. But he does run well enough to keep you honest. I think I'd looked yesterday. I think Dillon Gabriel has somewhere in the neighborhood of 350 yards rushing for his career. So I mean, obviously you take some of those quarterback sack yards away from that. So not a ton, but I think good enough to keep some of these teams honest.
Yeah, really, the only impression that comes to mind to separate the two players in particular, seeing that I watched Caleb Williams play, of course, once he entered the Texas game and then the bigger games down the stretch, and certainly the Oklahoma State game and the Baylor game was probably the struggle in my eyes from what I remember of his season versus Dillon Gabriel would be, I think Gabriel at this stage of his career, having played the amount of football that he has, plays a little more under control is the best way I can describe it. Caleb Williams seems at times when he's at his worst to be just kind of throwing his body out there and just kind of out of control. While Dillon Gabriel seems to be more or less running the offense and more in control of his game at this point.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think that comes with experience, right? I mean, Caleb made a lot of true freshman type decisions this year, right? I mean, and then I think Oklahoma knew that when he was thrust into the starting quarterback role after Texas, right? You're going to see a lot of good, but there's going to be some typical true freshman stuff that you see that's not the best in the world, right? So I think Oklahoma dealt with that and took the good with some of the bad. So yeah, no, I think you saw at times where he was out of control a little bit. But one of the things that I had always loved about Caleb is his leadership ability that he had as a true freshman. We talked about this when he took over for Spencer Rattler against Texas and what he was able to do to get Oklahoma a win in that game, showed a lot of leadership, and obviously a team that had rallied around him. So yeah, I mean, I think in terms of one of the other comments, I think he's going to be successful. I wouldn't say anywhere he goes, but if he's in the right situation, I think he'll be successful. He will improve his accuracy from a passing side, and he'll learn to play within the offense and settle down a little bit, I think.
And as we've talked about before, with this transfer portal and the development of quarterbacks at the high school level, I just think we've come to a point where, and we weren't at this point in college football 15, 20 years ago, and it's just slowly changed, where there are just multiple quarterbacks on every roster that are capable of taking over the team and hitting 65% of their passes and throwing for at least 25 touchdowns, if not more, and having a 3-to-1, 4-to-1 touchdown to pick ratio. And they're good passers. They're good quarterbacks. They're talented. They're athletic. And there are just multiples of these guys, whereas in most situations in college football, even among the best teams 25, 30 years ago, you didn't have NFL quarterbacks as backup quarterbacks in college football, like guys that could legitimately get drafted or be a free agent in an NFL camp and find themselves with a clipboard in their hands with a 5-year NFL career. And they never started or rarely started in college and struggled to get a starting spot in college. That the quarterback position is that deep now, whereas 30 years ago, you didn't know what you were getting if the starting quarterback, even at Oklahoma, Ohio State, Alabama, went down. It was like, wow, we're in trouble. They've just been developed so well, and there's so many of them, and they're so good at throwing the ball these days. And again, with all these camps and the amount of professional attention that's been given to these elite players at a young age, I just think they're really good.
No, you're absolutely right. I think historically you would say you get the backup in there, you've got a much, much better opportunity to win the game, or at least take advantage of that, right? And that's obviously not necessarily the case this day and age, right? You throw the Oklahoma situation out there. I'm trying to, even with Alabama a few years ago, know that both Tua Tagovailoa and then also Jalen Hurts have both been starters, but then you've got a guy that hasn't really played hardly at all year, and then he's thrust into the SEC championship game, and look how he played. So yeah, it's different. It's a different situation. You need, much like in the NFL, you need two starter quality quality guys to be able to, because the chances of somebody somebody getting hurt or whatever is pretty high. So yeah, I think that's very consistent across the country.
All right, folks, we appreciate you being here for another edition of Oklahoma Sooners Live. We've got about 300 on the line, so we would ask that you would just wait for the video to post if you've missed part of the show, and you can watch the rest as soon as it posts, and actually might be available. I need to test this out myself, but I think I get varying conclusions to this as to whether you need to wait for it to post a few minutes after the show, or if it's immediately available right here on YouTube. So we appreciate everybody being here. Check out Jason and the rest of the staff there. Last Word on College Football. And if anything else happens, we will do our best to jump online at some point. Otherwise, we will see you back here next Wednesday. Jason, we appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it.